And now, for our first session, we will be handing things off to Nettie Wiebe, whose keynote will include the knowledge and experiences she has gained across her varied agricultural career and her social activism, political engagement, and advocacy for women in rural communities. Thank you, Nettie.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very, very pleased to be part of this discussion, and I'm really looking forward to the panels that follow. I'll just say a little bit more about myself here. I'm deeply immersed in agriculture. Grew up on a farm, as many of these panelists also did. I grow food in fields, in the garden, and until recently we had cattle, so in pastures. And my roles include keeping farm books and some marketing. And I cook with pleasure and I eat with even greater pleasure. So I'm all about food. I'm also an agrarian feminist and have been for many decades, owing a lot to the long history of agrarian feminists who led in the Persons Case, in matrimonial property acts, voting rights, all kinds of struggles for the equality and participation of women. And it's my view that justice and equality for women, including those who are marginalized, is fundamental not only to the future of agriculture and food security, but also to the whole living environment, biodiversity, climate, social peace and justice, and future generations. And everyone in these panels is clearly also dedicated to this project and has a huge and deep participation in food systems in various places. Kitchens, fields, research, universities, labs, boardrooms. We're all experts. And I want to say a little bit more about confidence and being experts. I want to return to that a little later. One of the things, I listened to all of the interviews with great interest, and one of the things that I thought was emphasized, and rightly emphasized, is that a lot of our work is about relationships, about care, about interconnectedness, and there were lots of insights on that. And that, I think, is not to be lost. That's, women make a huge contribution to agriculture in many parts of the world, actually. Women are the primary producers for food for their families and communities. And it seems to me that we have a possibility and actually a role of not just speaking in agricultural context in a higher octave, but to articulate and to appreciate diverse perspectives and approaches. And this emphasis that many of you made on understanding interrelatedness builds on relations of care, collaboration, respect. And that's very important. The recurring question for us in agriculture and for many people is, what is agriculture actually for? And the current dominant view seems to be that agriculture, particularly at the production end, is about more production, more agri-food experts. That's very much the goal of the industry and Ag Food Canada, and more capital investment. And I must say that on that trajectory, on those trends, Canadian agriculture, our agriculture is, in fact, very productive, very innovative, very technologically sophisticated, and increasingly concentrated at the farm level. And that's part of the drive for more investment. That's the underbelly of it, which means fewer family farms and fewer small-scale farms. But the current outcomes, and I don't want to just say the current context, I want to say outcomes of this view, because of our contribution to this, is climate uncertainty, which makes food production actually at the farm level much more challenging. Agriculture has a huge contribution to climate variability. Although there's a lot of language on sustainability, we are continuing to ramp up our agricultural emissions, increasing them by 22% in the last 2 decades. And Canadian farmers have doubled nitrogen use in the last 3 decades. So we're very, not only here in Canada, but globally, very considerable contributors to one of the big problems that confronts us. Then if you read the Living Index, Planet Index, you read some alarming figures about the loss of biodiversity in the monitored species. And I want to say you should keep this in mind. It's the monitored species because we actually know a very limited number of living organisms in the whole context, but they say something like 73% of the species diversity has been lost globally, mainly through food systems driving habitat loss and degradation. And in all of this grim news, for me, who worked for some years as a civil society and small farmer representative in the Rome processes, the international conversation around food security and food policies, I looked at the World Food Day data released by SOFI, the State of Food Security and Nutrition World Report, this last report, and we are losing ground on actually feeding people. 1 in 11 people worldwide face hunger as we speak, and that's something like 2.33 billion people globally, with 864 million of them experiencing severe food shortages, hunger. So it's not working all that well on that level of values. I want to say that this is the context of an agriculture that's deeply patriarchal, which has shaped the current food systems. Ownership of productive resources, land and capital, remains primarily in male hands, and the dominance of the male voice in boardrooms and around policymaking tables continues, maybe not as clearly as 20 years ago, but let me just say that I have lots of experience when I was NFU president of being the only woman in, because I was leading a national organization at the national level in policy discussions. Quite often the only woman around the table, actually. So I'm acutely aware of where the decisions are being made and by whom. So I want to argue that what we need is a change in the culture of agriculture. We need to re-examine what counts as expertise and actually who's counted literally. Let me just digress here a little and tell you my experience. Throughout our history, the Canadian Agricultural Census always had only one line for farm operator. So farm women who didn't have off-farm work had to list themselves as unoccupied. And I always said to farm women, this is odd. How can one be so tired at the end of the day when you've actually been unoccupied? But it was because there was only one line for the farm operator in the farm census form, and George or Bob or whoever was the male on the farm filled out that line. So we in the Farmers Union and some other women's organizations lobbied to have one small change made. Just add an S there and a few extra lines for farm operators. So in 1991, when that was done, actually, a lot of farm women put their name as farm operators also. I was on the desk of the women's president of the Farmers Union at that time. And then after the 1991 census was released, the number of women farming had gone up from 9% listed in the 1981 census to 26% in the 1991 census. So I got all these media calls to say, aren't you delighted that so many women are participating in farming? And I had to continue to say, no, 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 no. This is a matter of counting. We have always been there. We have always been in agriculture. We have always been in food production. We have always been in all parts of this food system. It's not that the reality has changed. It's that the counting has changed. And I just want to say in this as a key learning here, if you're not counted, you're discounted. And that brings me to the piece around confidence. A lot of the interviewees, panelists, you noted that you gained confidence, you struggled to gain confidence in your own domain, in your own sector of work, and in your own workplace. Let me just note that girls aren't born with a self-doubt gene. We're not genetically programmed to lack self-confidence in our abilities, in our knowledge, in the veracity of our experiences. It's within a patriarchal context that we learn that. It's not a personal failing so much as social messaging that keeps women in their places. And this is especially deep-seated in agriculture. Because as I said, agriculture is deeply patriarchal. So we, as women leaders in agriculture, have a lot to deal with. But as I noted earlier, we have made a lot of gains in Matrimonial Property Act laws, certainly in education, in professionalism, in the positions, and many of you in the panel will articulate this, the positions you have, the respect you've earned. But none of this is magic. It takes, and you all know this, advocacy, organization, hard work, struggle, because the bias is that real knowledge, real expertise is quantifiable. It's about hard facts and data. And in that, if you stay with that grid, then it's hard for a lot of the huge contributions that women make and must continue to make to be really counted. So we need to critically assess the role and power of what counts as knowledge, what counts as expertise, and what kinds of work and values are not captured by those quantitative measurements that are qualitative. And I noted in some of the interviews that you talked about soft contributions, soft skills. I object to that language, but I don't object to that concept. I think care and softness and insight into how people and nature interact are key to our future. So what I'm arguing for is changes in perspectives and approaches and values. That's what's needed. Women can and often do bring a deep commitment to nurturing relationships. And I'm struck by how many of the panelists actually talked about the importance of relationships, of collaboration, of support teams in their interviews. And the need to nurture new life-giving relationships is key to our future, not only in our own families, in our workplaces, in the social environment, but in global contexts. And I want to extend this need for relationship with the natural and the biological world around us. This need has never been greater. So the work of women in agriculture has never been more needed and more intensely necessary. Our world is more complicated, complex, mysterious, amazing, interconnected, and beautiful than our current understanding can possibly describe. And women in agriculture can, and I think should, lead the way into a future where we seek to understand this better and enhance our understanding of relationships. That will require a lot of open-mindedness, curiosity, courage, and care. But I am confident that we have that. I'll end by quoting a famous American Black writer, Alice Walker, who said wisely, I think, and women should remember this, the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. I think we have lots of power to change the approaches, the values, and the future of agriculture around us. Thanks.
And thank you so much, Nettie. That was wonderful. If anyone has any questions for Nettie, now is the time to pop them into the Q&A tab. But while we wait for that to happen, I will give you a quick question from me, I suppose. So you talked about the importance of relationships and how kind of you've helped to change the perspective of like the sole farm operator into kind of the entire farm family or the farm team being the operators, because that is the reality. It's not like farming is so interconnected and interpersonal. How do you, like, are there ways that you could recommend changing that perception with the public? Like how have you done that? How have you seen other women or groups do that?
Well, I think this event will expose how many other women are doing that in our own domains. But for me, I'm always reminded of how one actually makes progress in the long run. There's a famous African saying that goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And it seems to me the collaboration, not only with other women in agriculture, although that's a very important network, and many of you mentioned that, that's an extremely important and often a key support network. Those relationships are important. But of course, we have to remind ourselves in agriculture that everybody eats. So our allies are around tables in every part of this country, and particularly women in every part of this country who understand the importance of good food and increasingly understand the importance of environmental care and biodiversity. So we have actually a broad range. And I, as someone who works in a farm organization and with peasant and small-scale farmers around the world, I am very acutely aware that many of our strong allies who also wish for a better world for all of us and healthier food and food in the right places on everyone's table, we have allies in all of those places. So it's that I emphasize relationship building, and many of you in your interviews did also, because it's not just on us as women in agriculture, it's actually on everyone who eats to start to engage in this and to make the changes necessary in this food system.
Excellent, thank you. Sorry, Abri, I didn't realize I jumped in on you.
No worries. I was just going to bring in the question in the queue.
Sure,
but
go for it.
Right. We're a friendly bunch here at Ag Annex. So Janine Gibson says, how do we encourage more resilient organic production methods in the face of reducing input costs? I think this means rising input costs, threatening input suppliers' profits.
You've asked the $64, although $64 is a question, but that's a way underestimate the multi-billion-dollar question of in agriculture, of course. And I noted, I waved my hand at the investment portfolios. It's harder and harder to make changes, the kinds of changes that that many of us are advocating for, as control over resources and markets becomes more and more concentrated. So there's a whole there's a huge lobby of people, myself included, and our organization, the Farmers Union included, that has had a very critical eye on concentration in the agriculture industry and what that means for small scale, diverse, and I can't emphasize enough how important diversity is for resilience and sustainability. And diverse production methods, diverse kinds of production, how important that is. And one of the ways, and I'm mightily encouraged by this, one of the ways this is happening is that a lot of, an increasing number, still not nearly a majority, but an increasing number of young farmers, particularly young women farmers, are in fact turning their attention to trying to raise agriculture products, good food, in ways that don't that aren't reliant on that high input, high investment agriculture. For one, it's impossible for young farmers to get into it in many places in Canada, but also more deeply holding that value that I articulated, that we want food systems to be resilient, diverse, life-giving, rather than controlled monocultures. I'm not sure I answered the whole question, but that's a beginning.
We do have one additional question in the Q&A. This is from Trish. She says, first of all, thank you for your message. She said, you spoke about the critical presence of women on farms and the shift to being counted. But in agricultural corporations, why do you think we aren't seeing more women senior leaders around boardroom tables?
The short answer, agriculture is deeply patriarchal. But the longer answer is, again, what I've already waved my hand at, and which many of the panelists also talked about, the difficulty and the hesitance women often have to claim their expertise and assert themselves. That doesn't mean that we have to be quarrelsome. I'm very seldom quarrelsome. It means that we have to be confident that our perspective, our values, our way of approaching questions, our insights are valid, and that they need to be taken into account. And I think that's harder and harder to do, of course, when you're more when the power is more concentrated, as it is in agribusiness firms. I mean, these are not democracies. These are corporate firms, so they have a structure. And it's very hard for women to insert themselves into that structure unless they accommodate and actually reassert the values that are already at play there, which is why I said at the offset, this isn't about just hearing more voices in the same chorus, some in the soprano and alto octaves. This isn't about that. And if that's all you're doing, then actually we do have some examples of women who have done well, I mean, in that scenario. But if we're actually going to assert our are deeper and perhaps more radical, but also more life-giving perspectives, then it is, I'm afraid, and the data backs that up, it is very difficult for women to assert that. The other thing is that it's not just agriculture that's patriarchal, it's our whole social system, and that's not just Canadian, that's global. In most places, it also means that women are often carrying most, if not all, of the domestic workload, the reproductive childcare workload, and so there's a limited amount, and I'm often blown away by how much women do, but there is a limited amount of time in everybody's day. So if you're already doing many of those other things, it limits the scope of freeing yourself to engage in more intense, higher level policy work and financial work. So that's another side of that, which I don't have to tell anybody. I mean, everybody's very familiar with that and has been for a long time. I think it was important, actually, and when we're doing food system discussion, it was important and an important lesson during COVID to expose just how essential the care work of women was in most households. And it came, I think, sometimes even as a surprise to women themselves, how things are organized around their care work.
That is a very good point, Nettie. Thank you so much. Now, we do have 4 minutes left for this segment. And although our Q&A queue is empty, I think I wanted to take my turn to ask a question because, not all of the people watching today are women. We have many men watching today's event. And so what is something that, in your mind, any man watching this could do today or tomorrow, which would help empower more women in farming or in the business of agriculture? What is some action that could be taken?
Let me just say at the outset, when I say our social structures are deeply patriarchal, these are structures that also constrain their male counterparts. Many feminist men, many men who long for equality and change are trapped in the same structures. So we have many, many allies. I would not for a moment say that that's a women's struggle only, that's a human struggle for equality and diversity. So any and every male who has some insights into how we move forward into an agriculture system, a food system that actually is sustainable in the long term, that is not as destructive as the current systems, no matter what gender, is of course an ally. So that allyship, that way of working together as equals with respect for each other's expertise and experiences, that's not just women to women, that's of course men to women also. And I have to say, in the course of my many years of advocacy, I have encountered countless male counterparts who were as adamant and as committed to the agenda of equality, respect, diversity as I was. So it's by no means, it's the men's fault. It is not. It is a systemic power structure. And of course, their beneficiaries are obvious in some cases, not always, but the beneficiaries are overwhelmingly male in the profit centers of the industry, but it's not nearly all males, and It is really a collective democratic process of trying to engage allies to move forward. And when I say if we want to go far, we have to go together, it's not just women marching. It is everybody who cares about good food, who cares about the future of agriculture, walking in a new way.
Well, what a wonderful note to end on. Thank you so much, Nettie. Thank you not only for your words today, but just for what you've contributed to this event and this program.